Hey everyone, I figured I would try something a bit different today. So my 350Z is in the trailer. It's in there to free up some room at the shop so they can get a few more things done. I have some pistons on order. I covered that in a previous video. They're on the way. They should be here at the end of the month. And then it'll be a rush job through May to get the car finally assembled for its first events of 2022. This week I'm going to answer 20 questions about my track 350Z. They might apply to a G35 or 370Z as well. But I get asked questions all the time, mostly through YouTube, mostly through Instagram. So I picked a whole bunch of them today. Answer them for you. I'll sort of publish the 20 best. If this is something that people are interested, there might be a second one. If there's not, well, it'll never be published again. I've got nothing to lose. There are a few hundred of you which tune into this channel regularly. So this is for the more hardcore people. What am I running for spring rates? So I use a 16 kilogram per millimeter weight. That's wrong. I use a 14 kilogram per millimeter spring on the front and a 6 kilogram per millimeter spring on the rear. They are true stock coilovers, so that's important. Back in the day, when you were street driving the car with the occasional track day, did you run a square setup? And if so, was it 275, 35, 18 all around? Curious to see if that caused any issue with the ABS sensor, etc. So back in the day, I did use 275, 35, 18 all the time. Square, yes. And did that cause any issue? No. So that's a fine setup. Go ahead and use it. Were the cams drop-in? Was any machine work needed to the head? No, the cams were not drop-in, and yes, machine work was required for the heads. They are JWG C10 and C9 cams. They have 13 millimeters of lift. I think the limit for drop-in cams is 11 millimeters. I'm not an engine builder. That just seems to be what I remember from going over things over time. So if you're looking for a drop-in cam, I think you need something less than 11 millimeters. People ask me about these cams all the time because they like the sound, and they do give good power, but once they find out how much work is required to put them in, they just say, the small power gain is not worth the cost. Have you thought about changing your power steering cooler to a bigger one? I got a G Plus 10 row and the fluid lasts a little longer. No, I have not upgraded my power steering cooler yet. Yes, I've thought about it. I've been driving around the track and I've had power steering fluid venting onto my windshield as I've been driving because it's been overheated. So it has something that I've thought about doing. I just haven't got around to doing it yet. We'll see how this year is getting started. And if it's an issue through the year, it might be something that I upgrade throughout the year. Can you run 18 by 10.5 plus 15 square with 295/35 with no rubbing or spacers? With the Akebono BBK, just wanted to make sure they fit. What other wheels would you recommend other than an RPF1 for track? They're so popular for a reason, but I want something different. I really like the Koenig hexaform. So yes, you can run 18 by 10.5 plus 15 square with a 295/35 with no rubbing or spacers, but you will have to roll or pull your fenders. It will also depend on ride height and alignment, but I've done that in the past with no issues. The Koenig hexaforms are fine. I've covered that in a previous video. The NK RPF1 and the Koenigs have essentially the same construction. They're owned by the same company. They use the same technology. So if you like the style of the Koenig hexaform better, go ahead and use them. Did I get the engine cryo treated and WPC'd? No, I did not. I had to Google what this even was, so I'm not that advanced and I'm not that knowledgeable about engine building, obviously. But cryo treatment is when they freeze the engine and then slowly bring the parts up to temperature. And WPC is when they use extremely fine particles to blast the surface of the metal. It gives it a more resilient finish. But like I said, I had to Google that in order to even understand what it was, and no, that hasn't been done. Do you win enough money in the tournaments to at least break even? Absolutely not. This is something that everyone does, just spending money to have fun. Almost no one makes any money in racing, but especially in the grassroots level, everyone's just spending money. And even if I wanted to keep elevating the level at which I race, it just costs more. In racing, there's almost no way to make money. Even if someone appears that they're making money, it's usually a shell game. Some sort of corporation is using it as advertising, but the actual racer or the race car driver's family owns the corporation that's sponsoring the car. It's a shell game. Almost no one makes any money. Me, myself, I'm just spending money to do it because it's a hobby. The 350 is front heavy. I thought the FR was like 5149 or 5248. So my car is actually 5743. It depends how much fuel is in the car for the stock car, but I believe the stock car is 5347. It is a front heavy rear wheel drive car. It will never handle as well as a car that's 50/50. They like to, in their marketing material early on, state that, oh, it's advantage when you accelerate, it's 50-50. Well, okay, great, but what happens when you're braking? It's really easy to overload the front tires. As you're going through mid-corner, the car is front heavy. So there's no reason to choose a 350Z as the best handling car. They are front heavy, rear wheel drive. It's something you'll have to overcome, and it's something you'll have to work with if you choose that as a platform. It's not a bad platform. You know, you pick it because it's cost effective. It makes reasonable power for its size. And if you tune them right, they can be quick, but it's not the ideal choice. If you want to hit the easy button, you want to start with a car that's 50-50. Hey Mike, was that an MREV 2 or did you just port the stock lower plenum from a DE? So this is a reference to a previous video where I posted a teaser of the build for the year. It's a stock lower plenum that's just been ported. How do I get my 370Z to sound like this? So this represents probably the vast majority of questions. Very casual people that are just think the car sounds cool and they want to duplicate it for the street. Essentially, it's very difficult. Like I had mentioned earlier, the cams are not drop-in. You'll have to do the head work, the cam work, and then you'll have to run a full exhaust, and it's just not workable for the street. And if you're asking me for the street, I would say, you know, it's not worth it. You know, for every little bit of positive attention you'll get 3 times the negative attention. And the power gains over what you can get with quieter mods, it just isn't worth it. So if it's a race car and if you're going to be using it on the track, and if it's something that you're going to be using in that way, sure, go for it. But if you're just going for the sound, you know, you're wasting your time. Are you planning to run a 90mm GM throttle body? Yes, I am. That was covered in a previous video. So I've gotten a 90mm GM throttle body, a Nisformis harness, and a Haltech ECU. And the goal is to get those working together very soon. So on to the next question. What's the compression ratio and what fuel do you use? So the existing pistons in the car are 12-to-1 JE pistons. And I use MS-109. But in a previous video, we had found that one of the pistons was damaged. So we ordered some 12.5-to-1, which is the reason for the delay. Those 12.5-to-1 pistons should be here shortly and we can carry on with the build. And I just ordered some new MS-109. So that's VP, there might be like a drum behind me, one sec. VP. So yeah, VP MS-109. Not sponsored by them, but hey, they're in the video. Have I ever pondered swapping in a second or third generation front wheel drive DE in the car? So I've gotten this a few times because the updated versions of the VQ35 DE that they use in the front wheel drive platforms, probably like the Maxima, are superior to the original engines that came in the 350Z back in 2002. But they're not superior enough. And by the time you switch all those parts over, you basically have the same engine anyways. So with the amount of aftermarket parts that I have for my 350Z, it would basically be pointless. There'd be no net benefit to swapping in a more recent design of the VQ35 DE. So short answer, no. All right, on to questions from Instagram. What aftermarket parts do I use to adjust front camber? SPL V3. So almost everything on the car is SPL. I'm not sponsored by SPL, but they make the best quality components. And for the front camber arms, you basically need to go with SPL V3 in order to get the amount of controllable negative camber that you need to make the car handle well. So if you want to make the car handle well, I'm not aware of many options beyond SPL V3. What suspension and tire setup will you be running with this season? So the suspension is the same as always. They're JRZ RS Pro coilovers with a 14 kilogram per millimeter spring on the front and a 6 kilogram per millimeter spring on the rear. They're true style coilovers. SPL bushings and SPL arms almost everywhere, not entirely everywhere. Some stuff is still OEM. I have a Hotchkiss sway bar with white line end links on the front. And this year, I'm going back to an OEM bar on the rear. What camber do you run in the front and rear? Have you done bump steer correction tie rods? So in the front, it depends. I think I usually run about negative 3.7. And at the back, it depends. I usually run about -2. I have not done the bump steer correction tie rod ends. I just saw those online. It's one thing I forgot to order and it's still OEM. So I'm going to try to run it that way for now, and there might be an upgrade that I do later. How do I adjust intake and exhaust cam timing with the JWT lock sprockets? I don't. So I know on my car, the intake timing, I think one of the sensors had to be disabled and a custom cam timing stop had to be welded to one of the gears. I'm not an engine tuner and I'm not an engine builder, so it's not something that I take care of. So I'm sorry, I can't give you a better answer. Ever consider changing the color of the car? Yes, it is being changed this year. I've ordered a wrap. It's going to be a color change later in the summer. Late May, mid-June, that color change should occur. If you're wondering, I've chosen 3M Black Rose. I've always liked kind of purple and I think it will look good. What power is the engine making this year? I'm not sure. It hasn't been tuned yet. It hasn't been built yet. I'm hoping for over 350 wheel horsepower on a Mustang dyno, but time will tell. I'm not sure. You've had the JRZ set up for quite some time. Curious if you've had to freshen them up. No, they've been totally durable since I began using them. I first installed them in 2015. I used them all season 2015. I didn't do many events in 2016. I used them all through 2017, so that's probably 15 track days. And then 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, I basically didn't use them at all. So they really, even though they've been in the car for many years, they don't have that many days on them and they're perfectly fine. Why did I go back to the OEM sway bar? So that's basically a driving preference thing. I prefer a lot of rear end grip on the car. I don't want to be babysitting the car into the corner and through the mid corner. I basically want the rear end of the car to have a lot of grip so I can roll into the power as soon as possible without losing power because the rear end steps out. So because the 350Z is front heavy, it has poor grip on the rear axle. So you need to make compromises with how soft the rear is in order to put down power effectively. So in the past, I was running a lot of wing angle with my APR GT250 in order to get that grip, but I was losing straight line speed because of the amount of wing angle that I was running. So the goal is to run less wing angle, but maybe a little bit softer in the suspension so that I can get the grip out of the corner without sacrificing straight line speed. It's a long answer. What oil and oil cooler do you run? What temps do you get on the track? Do you run the OEM heat exchanger? So I usually just use, in terms of oil, what I win. The events are usually sponsored by Motul, so I end up using Motul 5W40. My oil cooler is a Setrab 925, a big oil cooler. You can see it in some previous videos on the front of the car. And with that setup, it never climbs above 190 Fahrenheit. Most of you are Americans, so 190 Fahrenheit, the oil stays pretty cool. Do I run the OEM heat exchanger? No, I use a Koyo racing radiator. I had an OEM radiator previously, but the car did overheat using that radiator. That's probably how I did some engine damage. So I did have to upgrade the radiator, or I guess if you're in Europe, a heat exchanger. How much horsepower can your Z build on 91 octane? So how much power does the car make on 91 octane? I'm not sure. I've always had 94 octane at least available. Where I live, 94 octane is from the pumps. It does make a difference though. Even though I run MS109, I think probably from MS109 to 91, you probably lose about 15 horsepower. But that's a guess. I'm not sure. I've never tried. Have I ever run the car without the rear sway bar? No, this is a thing that I've heard about and I've heard it's fairly popular to do. Run the car with no rear sway bar at all. Once again, it's just achieving that soft rear end and the tire droop required to get good rear grip out of the 350Z. I think if I was running in the rain, I would crawl under there and disconnect an end link so that I effectively have no rear sway bar. But no, I've never tried without a rear sway bar. By accident, I broke an end link on the front and then I ran the car for 2 days without a front sway bar and the car was terrible. So not recommended. I essentially lost 2 events because I had no front sway bar working at all. And then by the time I climbed back in there and reconnected it, I won all the next events in a row. So it's the difference in how the car handles, big time. Do I have the stock rotor diameter on my 350Z? Yes. I upgraded from the performance brakes, the non-Brembos, that came with my 2003 350Z or 350Z. And I just upgraded to the OEM Brembos. What's the biggest change the Z is getting that I'm excited about? So the biggest change for me is finally refreshing the engine. I was running with reduced power through most of 2017. So even though the car did well, the car was a bit sluggish, and I'm just looking forward to having the engine refreshed. That's going to be fun for me. So do I recommend a 9.5-inch square for an amateur, or full sand and get a 10.5-inch wide wheel? I don't know. Both are fine. If you're going with, a conservative setup, the advantage of a 9.5 is the tires are a little cheaper. But the advantage of a 10.5 is that you're just going to have a little more grip. Both fit. If you pick the proper offset, and with a 10.5, you might have to roll your fenders a little bit. You might have to pull your fenders a little bit. But with the stock body 350Z, it will fit fairly big tires and fairly big wheels in there without much issue. I personally, if I was spending my own money, wouldn't waste money and get the smaller tire. If you're going to be upgrading your wheels and tires, you might as well upgrade them to the limit that the stock body can accept. I would just go with an 18 by 10.5 and call it a day. I wouldn't be buying something narrower and then wish that I'd upgraded that extra inch. I would just pick the bigger size to begin with. I originally had 18 by 9.5, and once I saw how easily they fit and how much room there was, I upgraded to a 10.5 within a few months. How'd you come about choosing the spring rates on your suspension? So I actually didn't choose the spring rates all by myself. I consulted an engineer, and the engineer calculated the wheel rates and calculated, sort of what would be optimum. And then given my driving preference, we picked something that was a little bit softer on the rear. So with my true stock coilovers, and I like a lot of mechanical grip, we have a 14-6 split. And for true stock coilovers, that's about the ratio you want. So you could go like 7-15, or you could go like 8-16 or 8-17. If you're going with an OEM style coilover with a 350Z or maybe a G35, that ratio is cut in half. So, instead of having a 14-6, I would have chosen a 14-12. And you can scale that ratio all the way up depending on how much aero or how sticky your tires are. If you're running on a very smooth circuit, you have slicks and a ton of aero, you're going to want much stiffer springs, but the ratio will probably be about the same. I think that's about it for this edition of 20 questions about the Track 350Z. If you have other questions you'd like answered, let me know. Might be a regular thing, might not, I'm not sure. I've got a bunch more parts coming and final assembly, and the first competition should be next month. Hopefully the car's ready. I'm sort of 60% sure it will be ready, but we'll have to see. Anyways, I'm going to sign off for this video. We'll catch you next time.